Oh, okay. All right, well, welcome and thank you for joining us this evening. So since 1959, the Skank School has been a leader in teaching children with dyslexia-related learning differences. Since 2019, City Schools of Decatur has been diligently aligning our practices with the science of reading, and the Skank School has served as a wonderful resource and thought partner. Tonight, I'm happy to introduce Ellen Hill, the current Director of Community Engagement at the Skank School. She has spent 35 years at the Skank School as a teacher, administrator, and other varied roles. She has an undergraduate and master's degree in learning disabilities and is a fellow member of the Academy of Orton-Gillingham Practitioners and Educators. She has taught courses in reading for many public and private school teachers and presented informational sessions on reading at many local and national conferences, schools, universities, and throughout the United States. On a personal note, Ellen is married to a dyslexic and is the parent of 2 dyslexic children. I am grateful for her to be here and share her knowledge and wisdom with us this evening. Please welcome Ellen.
I cannot tell you how excited I am to be here, and I am delighted to the nice people in the school system that have included me and invited me. It's just so exciting. I know a lot about what's going on in Decatur, and I'm thrilled to be here and thrilled to hear about so many of the things that are going on. And so I was asked to just come talk to you guys about reading. I know that there's a lot of great information out right now. I know you may be hearing a lot of different things about science of reading, structured literacy, and some of those things. So I just thought it might be fun to take a minute and let's just talk about reading. I think it is hard for parents to know a lot of times, if you're not an educator, exactly what all that is. And so I thought it'd be fun. We'll do a little bit, some of this you may know, some of it might be new, and we'll just see how it goes. But the first thing, I did title this, How the Brain Reads. I want to talk about how that occurs, struggling readers, and then intervention for struggling readers mostly. So we'll get started. Let's see. Okay, I can just click like down. Okay, all right, it's all good. Okay, so first things first, right? Reading in America, how are we doing? And, most people would agree that we are not doing well in America, right? We are failing reading, and it's not going well. And so, of course, the interesting thing I will tell you is if you look at these scores, you'll see the blue states with 10 to 15% of these students having trouble doing fine in the area of literacy. 15 to 20%, you see the green. 20 to 30%, of course, that's Georgia, and then 30% or greater. As far as the people not doing well, right? Below a 5th grade level of literacy. Now, this was taken in an adult study, but it still just goes to show you that, it really is a crisis. Reading is a crisis in America. And I will say, one thing that I do find is interesting is I actually did take this from about a 2 to 3-year-old study, and that red state of Mississippi, on the red, and they are doing a lot of things. They finally said, forget it. We're going to really change things here. We're tired of being last on the list because consistently they were the 50th state when it came to reading, and it is no longer red. So that's very exciting as well. But here's what we do know, right? We know that 25 to 35% of learning to read is accomplished with ease, all right? 60 to 65% will have difficulty learning to read. And about 20% will find that is absolutely the hardest academic thing for them to do that they're ever going to encounter. And of course, they start encountering it when they're 5. So already it's a problem. And so a lot of people have said, why is this the case? And if you go to literacy websites, and it used to be in the day that you would go and they would have lots of reasons. You can imagine what some of those reasoning would be. Oh, obviously, you know, there's poverty. And if you have poverty, that means that you don't have the resources in your home that you may need. There would be all kinds of things. Maybe children aren't getting good beginning skills before they head to school at that time when they need. But there weren't a lot of things that said this, okay? We know how important it is, right? We know it's an essential skill, that reading is, across the modern world. We know that no matter what, not just in America, across the globe, there are children that are failing to acquire literacy skills. And so, you know, for some of it, it might be that lack of good instruction. Some of it is language exposure, how important that is for children to be spoken to, talked to, exploring all these words that they're about to encounter in their reading. But for others, it's a brain-based difficulty and a specific learning disability in reading. And you don't really see that. You know, nobody's saying, hey, why do you think there's so much trouble with, if you went out and asked people, just general population, most people aren't going to say, oh, well, it's probably a brain glitch in the wiring of the brain, right? That's not out there, really. It's getting there, right? And so one of the things that Dr. Beam said about me, and this is something I feel very fortunate about, is I did not think I was going to be a teacher when I went off to college, but I ended up becoming a teacher, and I was so excited. And I ended up getting into special ed, working in learning disabilities. But I happened to find a job at this little school in Atlanta, Georgia. I got plopped there, and it was rather miraculous. I did get plopped there because my husband, who is dyslexic, actually attended that school in 1976, probably before most of y'all were even born. But how fortunate for him. They didn't even know what to call it. They just knew he seemed like he was an average kid, should be doing well. He wasn't. And they said, there's this man that started the school up the street. He happened to be in the right place, right time. He went there, changed his life. So still tell you to that day, to this day. And then, but that's how I got there, because I could have landed at another school. I actually was interviewing in DeKalb County, Gwinnett County, and that's where I got my job. And so I feel incredibly blessed that I got put in a place where they were already working with children who were struggling with reading. So from day one of my career, I started being told what to do and how to do it, because this school had been around and what they were doing was working. And that's about all we really knew. There was definitely some brain research going on, but it pretty much was, look, a lot of people that have been working with struggling readers, teaching them this way, it's working. And to this day, we are still doing those things. So that's interesting. But what has been great about it, of course, and I'll get into this in just a minute, is what we do know now is backing up a lot of what I started doing the very first day. So we know that this is one of the things, of course, that we've learned, is that speech, it turns out, that's a biological specialization, right? But reading is actually cultural invention, okay? And people were on this earth for thousands of years before they actually ever had a written language, therefore a reading language. So we know that speech is mastered just naturally in all people without direct instruction. It's very rare that a child doesn't start talking. Sometimes, of course, they may have difficulty with that, apraxia, but it's very rare for a child to be mute and have difficulty. They just get going, right? But that reading is difficult, and failure occurs in large numbers of children, and across written languages, even languages that don't have a sound-symbol relationship. You know, if you think about some of the languages that are much, much older than ours, you know, and they have a higher symbol for a word, it still is very difficult for them to acquire the reading skills that are necessary. So bottom line is there's no brain specialization for reading. So we know that what we've got to do is interpret all this great language that we start getting the day we're born, right? we start taking all that language in, but somehow we're going to have to get it from that spoken language to the written language. And of course, you know, it's been said many, many times before, if you think about it, if you think about that long, long history we've had with written language, it's really only been about 120, 130 years that we've required everybody to read. And that's an interesting thought as well. So what we know is that when we get these young children in and we're going to start this whole process of trying to develop this reading pathway, we find out that children are wired for sound, but that print is really an optional accessory. And for a lot of kids, it's got to be just painstakingly bolted on. I really like that quote from Steven Pinker, because it isn't easy for all kids. So why isn't it easy? Let's talk a little bit about this, right? Let's talk about the brain research. And believe it or not, they've been studying brains and how children read since 1800. Okay, this is not a new thing, believe it or not. And even in the 1850s, they were trying to figure out why there were some children that were having trouble reading when they seemed to be perfectly fine in other things. But so the science of reading that you may be hearing a lot about now didn't just start recently, right? This has been something that's been going on. I just told you I was lucky enough to land at Skank when I was 5, because obviously I've been there 35 years. I started when I was 5. And anyway, okay, no, but anyway, I was lucky enough to land there, and they did have, you know, obviously one of the things, it interested people that there would be people that seemed to be perfectly intellectually capable and have such trouble struggling to read. So that's been going on. And they did have a brain bank where they were studying a lot of the anatomical differences in brains. There was a lot of research going on trying to figure all of this out. So it's been going on a long time. They knew a lot of the anatomical differences in the brain. They knew way before the 1990s. But obviously, what happened in the 1990s was the functional MRI. And that really was a game changer for the science of reading, because now they could. That is when things really got fun. So a lot of times when you hear about the science of reading, you do actually just think of that, right? Oh, that just must be the science of studying the reading. But one thing I really want you to know as well as parents is realize that's actually a two-part answer. So first of all, yes, there are a lot of people that use that reference, right? It's the neurological cognitive science studies of how the brain processes written words. And just so you know, some of the biggest names out there right now, Hollis Garber in France, but also Mark Seidenberg. We've been lucky enough to have him here in Atlanta. Both of their books are so fascinating and fabulous when it comes to the reading brain. They're the neuroscientists that are doing it. But the other thing that we have to consider is this. We have to consider that instructional research as well. All the studies that consider, you know, if this is what we're going to do, how is it working? Okay? So we do really need to be making sure that we are, you know, looking at things, strategies that could work, and has it been found effective, and can we prove that? So the good news is we can prove a lot of the things that have been helping struggling readers. So again, just think about that science of reading is really twofold. It shows us, it's all the stuff that shows us how the brain reads, but it also shows us the evidence that there is a best way to teach reading, and that we do know. So speaking of Stanislas Dehaene, you can watch a lot of his YouTube videos and things. He is really the one that started realizing, as he began to study his research, that it's really about these pathways, okay? And so the concept of this neuronal recycling comes from him. So it really is about this, and they started realizing that the brain functions actually utilize and they recycle existing brain circuitry. Okay, so that was one of the big ahas, okay, is that they realized that these pathways they can be recycled. So what they started realizing was this. So the first thing I'm going to tell you is I'm going to tell you a little bit about it, and I think this is hilarious that Ellen Hill is up here telling you about the neuroscience. But so this is like layman's terms, right? So the first thing I just want to tell you, for those of you who don't know, the reading pathway, when we start to try to develop that in young children, for a typical reader, takes place in the left hemisphere. The information, and so we're going to talk a little bit about the front, the middle, and then the back of the brain. So this picture, when you see my stand, it's as if you're looking at this hemisphere, the left hemisphere. So I just want you to know that. Here's the first imagery that we started seeing. So this was Dr. Sally Shaywitz. She and her husband, who were at Yale, they were the ones that, one of the ones, I think there were three, I think I'm right, 3 functional MRIs that were given to institutions to start watching the reading brain as soon as they were discovered. So one was in Colorado, one was at Johns Hopkins, and one was at Yale. So Sally and Bennett Shaywitz were the ones that really started watching this, and this is what they found. When you had a non-dyslexic, it was this really nice, beautiful on the left hemisphere, and that is where language enters in, right here at that Broca area. And just so you know, that's when children are able to start looking at the sound symbol and say, oh, okay, that is a B, and it says, that's an A, it says A. That's that word analysis. A little bit faster, and they're able to kind of blend that word together. There's a little pathway that goes to this area of language that's able to say, okay, I can blend that together. But, act, back, but, act, back. Okay? Now, when you show a child a word and they just look at it and say, back, that is down here in this back area of the brain, which turns out to be the most important area, because that's when you can look at a word like even a word like bite, and you just say bite. You didn't have to say, okay, oh, wait, there's a magic key. Oh, it's going to make the vowel say a long time, but it's not going to be big, it's going to be back. Okay? The minute you see the word bike, and all of a sudden you have a picture of the bike in your head, that's back here. Okay? So that was Sally Shaywitz's view. Now, guess what? We've made some progress in 20 years. I just wanted you to see if all the latest equipment and everything, they're looking at the gray matter and the white matter. And boy, are they having fun. Look at that reading pathway. This is what they get to look at. This is from Nadine Gabb's presentation. Nadine Gabb is at the Gabb Lab. That's what they call her laboratory at Harvard. And then again, I'm coming back to Dr. Stanos Dahan, because he is the one that really has done so much research on mapping and circuitry. So, I mean, look at his view, right? Because now he's like, okay, I really want to figure out. He knows that when a child begins to read, it comes up from the back, enters that visual, but then goes right to work to analyze that word. And how fast that can happen is, as you can imagine, incredibly important. So that sound and symbol relationship is so perfect and great. But guess what happened when they started looking at children's brains? They said, why do we watch some of these kids who are struggling with reading? As we keep hearing about that. Let's put them in an MRI and give them a book and have them read. And all of a sudden, there were inefficiencies. And the inefficiencies were very common. Okay? So they said, wow. And if you can see here, with a non-impaired brain, that very beginning little area, they didn't have to do a lot of that word analysis that B says, they just were like, oh, okay, but not a whole lot. But look at the dyslexic brain on the right-hand side. There was a lot of activity, a lot of brain power being put into analyzing those letters. Yeah, all of a sudden, the right side of the brain started being activated. And guess what? There's nothing on the right side of the brain that really is a good pathway for reading. Okay? So they're like, what in the world? And they started seeing that children who were struggling to read were all doing this. Okay? So that's when they started realizing there's a glitch in the wiring of the brain. And to be honest with you, the brain bank I was telling you about, they had already noticed some differences, some anomalies that were happening. And if you've heard the fact that dyslexia is genetic, it is. And what they do know is that in vitro, there is a little bit of an issue with neurons in the brain, and there is a little damage that's done right here in that broken area. And that's what causes the pathway of reading to be broken. So if you want to not fix the dyslexic brain, or, but help a child with dyslexia read, they're never going to be able to have that beautiful fluid pathway, because the issue is a glitch in the. So unfortunately, they can't create that same neural pathway that so many people do easily and quickly. Okay, so let's talk about those struggling readers, because it turns out it's a large percentage of people, okay? So, and here I did want to show you, I think this was just to reiterate a little bit about what is going on, was the fact that on the right-hand side, another view of that brain, just to show you that the non-dyslexic up at the top, that beautiful left hemisphere, and then the dyslexic brain trying to send it to the right hemisphere somehow to develop a way to figure out how that word could possibly be blended together to make sense, to know what that word is. So therein lies the problem, right? So obviously, that brain glitch is what they call dyslexia. And I put this slide up here because I want you to know this was coined, this trouble with words, dyslexia, was coined in the 1800s. So people have known about this, right? They've known that as soon as people started having to learn how to read, that there have been some people that have issues with it. So the good news was, with all of the people that began, and there's a whole list of them, they started realizing that it couldn't have anything to do with intelligence, because these students and children and people were being so successful in other areas. And they started realizing this is not a visual issue, because of course at first that's what they were thinking, but it's not. And they said, this is something going on in the brain. So luckily there were a lot of people early on, and in the 1920s and 30s, Dr. Samuel Orton, plus a lot of other amazing neurologists, began doing tons and tons of studies. Dr. Orton had some health issues, so he spent a lot of time doing research. And thank goodness we love Dr. Orton, because he is really one of the ones that got the whole world started saying this is not a visual thing, this is a brain thing. And it got everybody thinking about not only what's really going on, but how can we start helping these children. So, I mean, is this true? Yes. So we know that there are 15 to 20% of students with dyslexia. Now, I don't mind telling you, and we'll get to this in a little bit, but we recently have done a lot of studies through our sister organization, the Dyslexia Resource, that does a lot of teacher training. We've done a lot of surveys across the country asking teachers if they knew what dyslexia was and did they have any dyslexic students in their class. So many of them were like, no, I have no dyslexics in my class. But then if we say, well, do you have any struggling readers? Oh yeah, I got a lot of struggling readers. So again, it's just that disconnect between what might be going on with the struggling reader and how many of those struggling readers might be dyslexic. So anyway, but this is the truth. Over 40 million adults in America have dyslexia. So, luckily everybody's starting to learn more and more about it. A lot of awareness campaigns that are out there just to bring that, now that we know so much about it, there's a lot of awareness campaigns, I guess you could say, about dyslexia. One thing that is also being proven, and this is the case in my house, a child who has a dyslexic parent has a 50% chance of being dyslexic. So if you're dyslexic, it's a good chance that you're going to have a dyslexic child. And once you have a dyslexic child, your chances for the next one will go up to 75th percentile. So when parents often come and get screened for dyslexia at our school, or as a child who's been diagnosed dyslexic, it's not really like, oh, are one of you in the family dyslexic? It's usually like, which one of you is dyslexic? And that's not uncommon. many people, as you can imagine, though, very unlike my spouse, who was lucky enough to learn early on, they had no idea they were dyslexic. And a lot of it is, as they learn more about what we know, they start realizing, oh my gosh, I had trouble reading. Do you think I'm dyslexic? So it's very fascinating. I think a lot of you may know about this. This is just a list of the things that the dyslexia does cause. It does show up as soon as a child is starting to read, even just beginning those very sounds, right? Learning those little sounds. And we screen a lot of 4-year-olds in our school, and it really is amazing because they can come in and talk to you all day long. And when I say, are you learning any letters of the alphabet, they say, nope. Nope, we're not learning those. Don't know any of those. And I'll say, well, what about this one? Have you learned the D? No. Anyway, so it's just really fun. But it is that inaccurate or non-fluent word recognition, right? It's the deficit in spelling and decoding, the deficit in all the phonological components. It is often unexpected. You've probably heard that because it's not an issue of intelligence. It does have secondary consequences. And we're not sure about all of those things, but we do typically know that because many dyslexics are trying to use the right side of their brain, other things can be, the circuitry in other areas can be affected. And some of that it can make reading even a little bit harder. And some of it is wonderful because sometimes the other pieces, the artistic, creative side is also a little over activated, and that can turn out to be a wonderful thing when it comes to life. But anyway, we also know, of course, that it exists over all levels of intelligence. So the bottom line is that when you come to this reading skills, this acquisition is not gradual, all right? If you give a child some time to see if they could start pathway, beautiful pathway developed, it's not going to happen. So we do not believe in the gift of time, okay? Now, these children are smart. Can they start making progress? Yes. Can they learn a few more letters because they're working really hard? Yes. But the inconsistency, the slowness of it, and the effort that they're having to put into reading is really such a red flag. It just shouldn't be that hard. And it is. So, again, if the skills are not developing, those red flags need to be addressed. And early intervention is best, not time. Seeing a child, whether we think they're dyslexic or not, I mean, I say that a lot. I don't care if they're dyslexic or not. But if they're struggling with reading, hey, guess what? We know what to do. Let's start doing it, right? And we're going to start working on all those skills. So, of course, we do see a paradox occur in a lot of systems because we know that early intervention works best. But sometimes students don't receive services until 5th grade. And I'm happy to say that what I have learned about City of Decatur is that they are on it, right? They're not going to just wait, which is fantastic. So let's just talk real quickly about some intervention, just so you know. I want you to know this, okay? If you think about reading and you think, I mean, I've been doing this a long time, and there have been a lot of times people have said, what if we just forget reading? Right? We're getting to that world, right? We've all got this great technology, speech to text. Let's just stop reading. What was meant, go back to having it just be an oral world. And I don't think that that's likely, right? So we still have to say, okay, that's probably not going to work. We still really need to read. So what are we going to do? And why do we care? That was the other thing. Do we care that everybody learns to read? Well, obviously we do. And if you say, well, why? What's the ultimate goal of reading? Comprehension, right? That's what we want. We want to be able to read, to gain that information, whatever it is that we're reading about. So that ultimate goal is reading comprehension. So believe it or not, there's something out there called the simple view of reading, and you may be hearing about this. What is the simple view of reading? And I love the simple view of reading. Now, I'll tell you that there are so many people that just get all crazy about it. Well, it's really not that simple, and it's not, except that it can be if you look at it this way. and this is from Goff and Hunter from the late 80s. This is one of the things they said. If you want to have that ultimate goal of reading, be the reading comprehension, then all you need are two things: decoding, and you need linguistic comprehension, or a lot of times other models will label this as language comprehension. So if you can decode and you've got good language skills that can support that decoding, then you are going to be able to comprehend what you're reading. And notice that it is times, right? It's not really a plus, it's a time. They've got to work, those two things have to work like this. Okay, you can't take one and then add the other on later. It's got to be hand in hand together. So the other thing that's been happening in the reading world, and I have to say, is Hollis Garber, who is at the Haskins Lab. I believe she's partly retired now, but she's still a little involved. But she's with the Haskins Lab at Harvard. She was explaining to some of the students there, they have a huge group of people at their laboratory, and some of them are young doctoral students, and here they all are, and she's trying to explain all of the pieces of reading. She has been doing this for years and years, as early as the 50s and 60s. She was really already working in this field. So she is a sailor. She's up in Boston. She knows about sailing. She loves this rope analogy. And she happened to have pipe cleaners on her desk. She said, look, this is how it is. She took a string of several pipe cleaners and several pipe cleaners, and she said, you know how when you're sailing, if you want a really strong rope, you take a couple of strands and you twist those together. And then you take another couple of strands and you twist those together. And then you twist that together and you will have that amazingly strong rope. She said, this is what this is like. This is what's going on in the field of reading. She said, you've got to have, and you think of Goff and Hunter, that language comprehension. These are the things that children need in order to comprehend a huge piece of all this language that they're doing, right? And look what it is. Background knowledge, right? That is a lot. It brings a lot. And for people who are reading, people that are involved in this world, there's some great videos and studies and things. And I don't know if anybody has ever asked you to read something that was kind of difficult and they didn't tell you what it was about, and you had to read it and discern and comprehend. There's some real funny studies about that, where they've asked you to do things and it's something like, how to run a washing machine, but they don't tell you that. So as you're going through, you're like, I don't get this, I don't know what you're talking about. And another study is a group of high schoolers where they took some really poor reading scores, a group of guys that were scoring so poorly in all their reading comprehension, and a group that had scored really well. It just so happens that the boys that they chose that were so, not sufficient in reading were on the baseball team, and these were not, and were not athletic sporty kids. Well, guess what they did? They sat them down in the room. They said, hey, we'd like you to read this paragraph and answer some questions. The paragraph was on baseball. You got the questions, most of the questions right. These very poor skilled comprehenders, right? Because they knew the material. They had the background knowledge. So we know that is huge, and we know we've got to make sure our kids are getting a lot of knowledge. Knowledge matters. It's very important. Also vocabulary. We do know we've got to teach vocabulary, right? We've got to make sure that we're doing all these other language structures like syntax and semantics. Do they understand how a sentence? And if they read it, will it make sense to them? That verbal reasoning, oh my goodness, I love this, right? But sometimes we know, you may know children who have trouble with inferences and even metaphors and things like, I do not get, what are you talking about, that it's raining cats and dogs? That makes no sense to me, right? Because they've never heard it's raining cats and dogs. It's that child sometimes that it'll say, as Johnny, they're reading, as Johnny was walking out the door, he grabbed his jacket, and then the question is, what was the weather like? And I love it because they look at you like, what are you saying about the weather? What are you talking about, right? Oh, well, what was it that he grabbed when he was walking out the door? Jacket? Oh, So again, they need to understand all of those inferences and metaphors and things. And then, of course, the literacy knowledge. They need to understand print concepts, genres, okay? I wouldn't be surprised if there's some of you in here who've read poetry and you almost had to read the poem a second time to make sure, like, I'm not real sure what the meaning of this poem is. So those things are so important. But that bottom piece is huge. So look at this other strand. At the bottom, it's basically word recognition. So we know in order for kids to really be able to decode that they have to have great phonological awareness skills. And that's the issue of, can they take a word apart? Can they put a word together? And it's not only phonological awareness, but it's morphological awareness as well, okay? Because if you say to a child, what is this word, running, and they don't understand that there's a base word and you're adding on a suffix, then again, are they going to be able to put that together? Can they even hear that it's two separate parts? So that can be tricky. The decoding piece, obviously, we know that we've got to teach children how to decode, and we know that they're going to have to, unfortunately, especially in our English language, which is a newer language, and we are so good about borrowing all kinds of words from other languages. Unfortunately, we have got to teach some words by sight, but not all words. It doesn't have to be a guessing game. So this rope right here, Hollis Garber, this is what she printed out about 15 years ago. She's very, very picky that we use this picture of it. There's some people that have prettied it up and done colors and stuff, but Hollis says, no, I like my original reading rope, so we're going with it. But this is one of the things I need you to know. I don't think I put this on the next slide. Let's see. No, maybe I didn't. Okay. You may have heard of the reading wars. What's been going on in the world of reading? That they would be having wars over reading, okay? So, you know, there are a lot of theories as to why, okay? People have been doing different reading approaches, but the truth is this. Some people felt like those language components are so huge for reading, and they are. So much time working on those things. There were other people that said, no, I'm sure you've heard this. You can't not teach phonics. You have to teach them phonics, right? You have to be able to, they have to be able to decode, or they're not going to even understand the vocabulary if they can't read the word. Well, it turns out, for a lot of years, people have said, nope, it's this way, this way, this way. And the truth is, it's not an either or. It's got to be both. And so the greatest thing is that that is what a lot of people are saying, and the research, of course, is all backing this up. So it's taken a while for people to get to this point, and again, I want to remind you about the science of reading, right? Where did that come from? I mean, is this really true? Is Hollis Garber's reading rope playing forward? I mean, the reading rope, I'm just going to tell you, you're going to start hearing more and more about that reading rope, because it is absolutely all the components of what we all need to be doing for reading. But, okay, fast forward a little bit, right, because it wasn't, remember the science of reading, right? Now they've been watching all those great brains, and now we know what's going on in the brain. How do we help those kids? Well, the first thing that you need to know is that in 2000, the very first research, and it's been, yes, 22 years, but there was a committee of reading professionals that said, we're going to go out and we're done. We want to figure out what works best. They spent 3 years doing the study, and they said, let's just take every single approach that's ever been taught in the United States, and let's see if we can figure out what works based on good research. Well, they did. And this National Reading Panel information was published, and this is when the word got out. If you want to identify key skills and methods that are central to reading achievement, here is what you need to do, okay? And they said you've got to do phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and text comprehension. And one of the biggest pieces of that really was the phonemic awareness, which really that phonological awareness was a big piece for readers, because they started realizing that kids couldn't take words apart and put them back together. Why? Because they've got a glitch in the wiring of the brain. So they realized we've got to teach this to kids, and that was kind of news to everybody. And as well, number two, the phonics, they said, you know what, it can't be just a little bit of phonics about a complicated language, it turns out, right? And it turns out vanilla with a couple of phonics rules here and a couple of phonics rules here. You're going to get a child to really decode. It's got to be a very systematic, structured approach, and it needs to be cumulative. It needs to build on itself. And when people ask me about that phonics, you know, the type of phonics, I say, you know what it is? It's the English language, and it builds on itself, and that's what we've got to do in order to teach reading. So, just so you know, the International Dyslexia Association was thrilled to hear this news, right? Because they're like, that's what people who've been working with struggling readers have been doing. They've been doing these things, right? This is what we teach. People in my school were like, oh my gosh, look, it's what we do, woohoo. And now we know that it really does work. I mean, we could have told them that, right? But, you know, you need the research behind it. I get that, right? So IDA said, we're going to call this structured literacy. Okay, so again, they took the National Reading Report because this is a giant organization that really is trying to help all readers. They came up with structured literacy. This is what it is. If you look at all those things, guess what it is? The top part of the reading rope and the bottom part of the reading rope. Aha! What do you know? Just so you know, State School, we've been around a long time. We have our own reading model. Guess what we do? The only thing we do a little differently, we actually add number one into our successful model because we believe that positive, encouraging environment, having a teacher who really knows the student's profile and really gets what's going on, and enough to where they can be very patient and empathetic, and they can really work with these children is critical. That's about the only thing we add. Look what else we do. We do phonological awareness. We teach decoding and encoding that, and we use the Orton-Gillingham method to do that. But we make sure we work on comprehension, fluency, vocabulary comprehension, and because we're a whole program, we believe that that writing piece also goes very hand in hand. We spend a lot of time, even in our phonics classes, working on letter formation, and as well as during our writing time, we work on handwriting, grammar, and all of those other components, the syntax, putting sentences together and stuff, and it just all goes together, right? So we work on that all day. There's a great other organization called Literacy How. This is Dr. Margie Gillis's work, and you can look at their oral language at the core, their wonderful work, and how they have summarized it. But the truth is, guess what? It's all about the reading rope. It goes back to all of that great stuff we have. I will say this, Nancy Young took those, do you remember those scores I was showing you at the beginning, the green, the red, the blue, all of those, some of those things. Some of Georgia ELA scores, if you ever look at a child's colored version of that, this is how they color code most all states testing, and this is what it looks like, right? So we know that if this is the case, this is what we send out. This is the ladder of reading. We know that 5% that seem to just read no matter what you do, yay, they've got that great brain and they love reading. And I say, you go for it and go read and read and read. That's wonderful, right? You might like reading in school so much that you might even go to law school. And then my dyslexic son down in that bottom 10 to 15%, who's going to probably have to, he's so creative, he's going to come up with his own business. He needs a good lawyer for his corporation. So I'm all about it. Let's just cheer them all on, is what I think, right? So 35% learning to read is relatively easy with broad instruction, but then it's the rest of the group that we worry about. And one of the things also that they have been studying is, well, what happens when you use the techniques that we know we need to do for these struggling readers? Does it work? Not only does it work for the struggling readers, it helps all readers, okay? Because especially the bottom part of the reading rope, we know that decoding, most of those kids can pick that up really easily, that reading pathway, they can decode really easily, but at the same time, learning about the morphological pieces and all the other pieces helps them tremendously. So it turns out what we do is very helpful if you do structured literacy, if you do these things using the reading road, it helps all readers, and that is fantastic. And I think I said that somewhere. Okay, here's the rub, right? This was from 2019, this quote. This is a little bit of the problem, right? It's a big problem. Only 37% of teacher preparation programs teach teachers the cognitive science of reading, okay? The teaching education is huge. And if you're a teacher, you probably have had that same frustration that even I had, right? Nobody taught me how to teach kids to read. Nobody. My master's degree is in learning disabilities. And at the time, I was already working at the state school. I went to Georgia State and I said, woo-hoo, oh my gosh, you should see what we're doing. This is really working. These kids come in and they can't read, and by the end of the year, we've got them reading. It's amazing. And this lovely professor, who I love to this day, said, well, I don't know anything about that, so why don't you do the presentation? So I did like a 2-hour presentation on phonics and decoding. Anyway, that was a long time ago. But this is a piece of it, right? So obviously we know we've got to change that. And the other thing I do want to tell you is this, before I move on with that. Some people have said to me, oh, why is this taking so long? Why are people then, the scientists talking to the educators and back and forth and some of this kind of stuff? And I will tell you, one thing I do want you to think about is this. When you talk about reading, and this is a quote from 2 Orton Gillingham specialists, but it's like, it turns out that if you suspect that something is wrong with your child, and maybe it's a medical reason, you go to the doctor, right? So first you have the parent comes to concern, they go to a medical doctor. That medical doctor looks at it, they're able to run some medical tests, and it just so happens because it's a hospital, the medical tests that have been done have been heavily researched by the building. They may even have, you may even need a specialist that's done nothing but study that medical science. They're all working together, they're talking, it works out, everybody's able to come up with that beautiful solution, right? Well, it turns out in the world of reading, the first thing that happens is teachers and parents start to say, this isn't working, what's going on? In order to get some help, you typically need a psychologist to do some testing on your child, okay? That's the next step, and they may be able to help you determine what's going on. At that point, you're going to take it back to the educators, right? And they need to make sure that they've got the right methods to work with this. Oh, and by the way, everything that they need to be doing should have been well researched by all the reading researchers. So I mean, let's get together and figure this out. We need parents, we need teachers, we need psychologists in the room, we need the reading researchers in the room, we need all the administrators, educators, just everybody needs to be in the same room. And that doesn't happen so easily in the world of education and reading research. And for instance, if you, International Dyslexia Association and other groups, obviously that's what they're trying to do, right? But anyway, so just so you know. One more little quick thing I will say, of course, is that bottom part of the reading road, the encoding, the decoding, that's really the main that all teachers miss. Nobody really told us how to teach a structured, sequential, systematic way to reading, okay? So it's unfortunate. I'm mad about it, right? I mean, why did I learn that when I was paying for school and I had all that time, right? And I will tell you, of course, I teach teachers now all the time, and I cannot believe how amazing they are to say, Ellen, I want to know this because I want to be able to help all the kids in my class, so they come on Saturdays. City Decatur Schools has been asking teachers to come and take a 70-hour class in all of structured literacy, and especially this decoding piece. And they've been coming over on Saturdays or going online on Saturdays, okay? And so it is really amazing. So, piece, the Orton Gillingham piece, I will say, genetic approach, I just wanted you to know that that is typically the best approach for that, hands down, according to the research, is Orton Gillingham. The only problem with it is that it is an approach, it's an educational philosophy. So there's not a set program that says, here's what you need to do, here's what you need to teach, and it just lays it out, okay? It's not something that's going to be learned in a 70-hour class, all right? That's just a start, but it can be done, and the most exciting thing, and this is what I tell my teachers all the time, is what you are learning is what people who've been working with struggling readers have been doing since the 40s and the 50s. What I do on a daily basis in the classroom is the exact same thing that Mr. Skank did when he started our school. It is the exact same thing that I've been doing for 35 years. So as wonderful, as hard as it is to be learning it now, guess what? You're learning the right way. And you're getting good information. That is exciting. But that systematic phonetic approach, learning those sounds in isolation, all of that is what takes place with Orton Gillingham. But Orton Gillingham is the bottom part of the reading road. Now, the only other great thing that did happen, I just want to say this, is that once they started coming up with the functional immorality, the first thing that they started realizing was, hey, if we're struggling with reading, and we've got all these people that are saying, what we are doing works, well, let's give that a try. And then we'll watch their brains, okay? And that was the most exciting thing of all. Because for a number of years, Skank School has been saying, what we do is helping, it's changing these lives, they start reading, we see it, it's so exciting. But what we found out was that the brain research is now supporting it. Because they took unremediated children, taught them using structured literacy, based on all the great science of reading, and then they said, let's see what happens now. And what they found out was that remediation changes the brain. So what they started realizing was they needed the pathway. Remember, we really need to get back here where we see the word bike and you don't even have to think about magic key and we picture a bike, okay? That's where they needed to be. And it turns out with the right remediation, remember the neuronal recycling? Turns out you can make a different pathway for reading for these kids. And that is what started taking place. So people say, can you develop that pathway? Not exactly, but we can do a scenic route that starts here, goes, but it does come back to here, where a child can then start decoding successfully and reading well in order to have that bottom part of the reading road successful. Now, but as you can imagine, if you take the scenic route, it takes you a little bit longer. Alice Shawitz says dyslexia, which we know that this is what's going on in the brain, dyslexia robs people of time, and that is why they will always be slower, and workload will be a difficult thing because, you know, they're reading slower. So there's other things that will take place, other problems. It's not something that goes away. You can improve it, you can remediate it, but there's just other things that you do have to take into consideration. So just in my summary, look, no more reading wars, right? That's done, that's over. And if everybody could focus on those 8 components right there, those are the areas to focus. I'm very excited to say that it's happening, it's occurring, the information is out there. I do want you to know another thing though, like I was saying, it's not as easy for those struggling readers. And sometimes you also, as a teacher, have to figure out how long is it going to take to make that new neural pathway, right? And we know that those neurons that fire together, wire together, well, how long is that going to take, okay? So that is a piece of it. So some children might need it broken down a little bit more than others. And then some children are going to need more repetition of that in order for that to take place. And that's a big piece of it, okay? So not only do you have teachers that are going to need to make sure that we're all doing the right thing, but then we also are going to have to figure out who needs it broken down a little bit more and who needs more repetition. So we know early intervention is best. Don't forget that there are people that have made it down that reading road, right? But I like to say, and this is when we work with older kids, I say this a lot, right? You've got this great pathway of reading. The fact that you've been able to do this without a really quick reading highway is amazing. But what we do need to do is go back to the very beginning of this English language and make sure that you understand all the components, and we're gonna fill in these gaps of things that you've missed. And when we do that, they will read faster, so that's very exciting. So I just wanted you to see this again. This type of instruction works for all readers. I tell teachers all the time, this is exciting. You know why? You know why it's worth this effort? Because you're gonna be changing brains, and that's unbelievable. Nobody told me that when I first started being a teacher, right? Hey, you wanna get into the brain-changing business? No, right? But now I do. I think it's fantastic. Parents, I'm just gonna say, I think you know this, read, 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 read. This is what you could do, especially while your child is being remediated in reading, okay? I just want you to know, when my dyslexic children came along, I thought, how fortuitous, right? I am their mother. I am a dyslexic expert at this time, so won't this be fantastic? And as many of you know, right, as a mother, your child, it was hysterical. And so the best thing I could do was read, read, read. Now, we did do play games, and we did some things that I knew would be beneficial, but trust me, even with all that, turns out they were very dyslexic and needed some good intervention. So provide that knowledge for them, okay? Remember background knowledge. While they are being remediated and missing on vocabulary and things like that, you give it to them, okay? That can take place in all these great videos, experiences. Talk with your children. Ask them lots of questions. What do you know about the solar system? What about this? What about this? Because you don't want them missing out on that. Focus on their strengths. Be that whole child. It's really a gentle, kind toughness, because the bad news is that when it comes to children that struggle with reading, it's what we ask them to do all day, every day. Okay, this is your job, right? Everybody says, your job at school. Well, it's the worst thing for you. It's going to be the hardest thing that you encounter, and we're asking you to do it all day, every day. So you do have to say to them, yep, I get this one, okay? But guess what? You can do this. And there is another piece of this, because even if school is hard and the workload is hard, please don't take away the whole child from them. Let them participate in those activities, the extracurricular activities. The other thing I'm going to say is this is a lifelong journey. Children doesn't go away. They'll always be dyslexic. So learn as much as you can about your child's learning, all the strategies that work best. Do find out what's happening in your school system, because you will be your child's best advocate. Now, I do say that this, all right, if you see that change is needed, and this is happening across America, and it's very exciting. It is very exciting. Because don't forget, I was sitting there doing this very thing the year that California schools crashed because they were only doing whole language. They were only doing like the top part of the reading rope, and kids stopped learning how to decode, and it just went. That was the very year that Georgia schools started whole language. Okay, so now looking at my seat, I'm so excited, right? Because of all the changes and all the proof that's out there. So do look for work together, study together, work together, okay? Because it's going to take all of you being kind and compassionate. You know what I say to people all the time? But by the grace of God go I. If I hadn't landed at Skank School to learn about reading, I wouldn't know what I know, and I probably would be right there having people say, everything you've been doing is wrong. And that's a gut punch, right? So be kind, compassionate to teachers, educators that are also trying to learn, work together. My advice is be that helper, help teachers, help other professionals understand. Let's all grow together, let's all learn together, realize that change takes time. The good news is that the Department of Georgia is also on this. They have put in some laws that I think are going to be beneficial, but guess what? There's some of the rules that are going to support that, as well as great guidance. I was on the Rules Review Committee. It's about to be published, and it's good stuff. It's going to really help those counties say, okay, if you're going to do this, right, here are the rules for that. And the guidance is even better. Because we can't really always, when it comes down to a law, say you're going to do it exactly this way. You can't really do that for all the county systems, but the guidance, if they are open to it, it's going to be incredibly helpful. Go to the Georgia Department of website, look up dyslexia. They just came out with amazing videos. I know y'all have been putting them out, a lot of good stuff. So we are moving in the right direction, and I'm thrilled about that. The last thing I'll say, because I know it's time for me to wind up, is do focus on your child's strengths. Remembering that they are, especially if you have a struggling reader, just remember their brains are meant for the world. I tell my children that all the time. Yep, I know school is hard, but your brains are meant for the world. Luckily, my children are remediated well, but school is still hard. The workload is still hard. They read slowly. It can be frustrating, and I just say, yep, I get it. It's hard. But you know what? You can do it. We're hills. We do hard things, right? My last name is Hill. Make sure that was clear. And we just keep moving on, and that's what we do. And I keep saying, don't worry, your brain's meant for the world. It's going to be so much fun to see what you do with that creative, amazing brain. Obviously, I always tell parents, find those people out there that learn like your child and make sure if they're well-known, if there's an athlete or something, that somebody they would admire. So many people out there with dyslexia. And just remember, again, just be the one that gently pushes. You do have to push these kids. You have to push them. And you're much better off saying, well, I get that. I understand you, but I know you can do it. So that's my biggest thing as far as parents go. And I've seen it work for 35 years. So keep it up. I did have one child that came to me and said, Miss Ellen, she had just won the highest GPA award. It was a something scholar. It was for the highest GPA at Georgia State. People in the class. Oh my gosh, Rachel. She said, Miss Ellen, you and my mother just told me I could do it, so I believed you. Anyway, so a lot of that is very, very, very true. So anyway, I hope this is helpful, and I'm done, and I can answer questions or whatever you need. So thank you very much for having me. It's past time, isn't it? So I timed my talk last night. It took me 40 minutes. How long does it take me tonight? 55. So I think everybody, you're free to go, obviously. But I'm also, I don't mind. I have teenagers at home. I don't want to be at home with my teenagers. Anyway, if you have any questions.